Hey! Welcome, new listeners, to Film Franchise Fortnights on the Cult Pop Podcast.
And old listeners, you knew what you were getting into.
You knew what you were doing. This is a podcast where me, AJ, and my buddy Richard. We watch the same film franchise once a fortnight. No, that's not what we do. We watch a different film franchise once a fortnight.
Or it's the same as each other.
Yeah, the same one as each other. Usually. More often than not. And then we discuss that film franchise. We talk about what went right with it, what went wrong with it. We talk about what could happen next were they to continue the franchise. And then at the end, we roll a dice, in the proverbial sense, to get our next franchise in a little segment called Franchise Roulette. And on this episode, after Franchise Roulette, I will also be reading out our backed up mailbox, which we haven't done for a while, so it might go for
also now last
10
week
minutes or so.
You teased that we would be having, or last episode you be teased that we would be having some very special guests. Do you want to introduce them, AJ?
No, I can't, because there was some technical difficulties for whatever reason, and what we promised as being our most amount of guests ever is actually our least amount of guests.
Tied for our least amount of guests ever.
We with no point saying who they were, but maybe we'll be able to do something with them later on, but not today. Not today, as Richard and I discuss the Nutty Professor franchise.
Yep.
That's it. What is the Nutty Professor franchise? Well, I can tell you. The Nutty Professor franchise is comprised of 4 films.
What? I only know 2.
Yeah, these include an original one in 1963, then probably the most famous these days version would be the 1996 remake starring Eddie Murphy, followed by the sequel to the Eddie Murphy film, and then an animated sequel to the original 1963 one in 2008.
A full 45 years after the original.
Yeah, and I tried to write down a cool statistic, but it got really convoluted, but then I kept it in because I thought it was funny. So here's that convoluted statistic, Richard. This franchise, the Nutty Professor franchise, is what I would call our second franchise, which was rebooted only to return to the original continuity in later films. The first being 101 Dalmatians, which had the original animated film, then 2 live-action films, then a sequel to the original animated film. However, this number changes if you factor in the Evil Dead series, which rebooted but then ignored the reboot for the TV series, which we didn't actually cover in our episode of Evil Dead because it's a TV series and not a film. And there's also the likes of Dumb and Dumber or Godzilla, where later films in the franchise ignore previous films, but those previous films weren't intended to be reboots at the time. And there's also Disney's Jungle Book franchise, which technically only counts if you include those weird, obscure, otherworldly live-action films in the series, which came out between the original animated film and its animated sequel, though I'd argue those films were more representative of the original books than intended reboots.
Yeah, also, would you count, like, X-Men? Because that was what sparked the initial discussion, I believe, about if there's ever been a time when a franchise has done this, and now we know that it's happened a couple of times. But because X-Men did the original, the Ridge Tridge, and then rebooted it with First Class, and then brought back the Ridge Tridge and made a sequel to both.
Yeah, but X-Men still feel like they're trying to be set in the same continuity.
Yeah, true.
Whereas none of these other ones do. And this is also our second franchise that is famous for an African-American comedian dressing up as multiple characters in the same family, hilariously including ladies, after Tyler Perry's Medea franchise.
It's also our second Eddie Murphy franchise.
After Shrek, yep.
Yeah. Is this our first one to like change mediums, going from live action to animated?
No, 101 Dalmatians did that as well.
Like in the same continuity though.
Oh, it might be. Oh, no, Medea did that.
Oh, yeah,
If
true,
you
true.
count the Medea continuity as being a continuity, Medea had an animated edition. So let's get into it, Richard. Let's get right into it. So the first Nutty Professor film, which came out in 1963, was directed by and starred Jerry Lewis, who, like, my parents know as being famous, but I'd kind of just heard the name
He
a couple of
died in
times in my
August.
life. Yeah, he died recently.
Yeah.
That film, what is that film about, Richard?
It's about a nutty, should we call him a professor, who's
Scientist.
nutty scientist, a wacky sort of scientist that he doesn't have much luck with the ladies. His name is Julius Kelp, and he invents a formula which transforms into Buddy Love, who everybody loves, and he's everybody's buddy. And
So he essentially goes from Professor Frink from The Simpsons to like
Dean Martin.
Dean Martin. That's great. Yeah, thank you for that. And being that this is an old film and oft considered a classic, what would you say its percentage score is on Rotten Tomatoes? What is the general consensus?
I'd go like low 70s, high 60s.
It's actually got 88% on Rotten Tomatoes. Yeah. And an interesting little tidbit, I've written down fun facts for each of our films this week, Richard. A big part of this film's marketing campaign, like the poster and the trailer, urged audiences to not reveal to their friends what happens in the middle of the movie, wanting to keep the Jekyll and Hyde subversion a twist. This was somewhat parodying Psycho, where Hitchcock insisted latecomers to the movie not be allowed into the theatre. It was, I guess, part parodying Psycho, but it is interesting that back then the idea of Jekyll and Hyde, but Hyde is a cooler guy than Jekyll, was quite an innovative idea.
Well, wasn't it like you can spoil the start, you can spoil the end, but don't spoil the middle?
Yeah, because in the middle of the film, Julius Kelp drinks this potion, and then he turns into like a Michael Jackson-style werewolf. Very briefly, I think, as like to put you off what you think is going to happen. And then it turns out he's actually suave and attractive Buddy Love. Anyway, so then I think 35 years later? No. 34 years later? I don't know. The Nutty Professor in 1996. So whatever 1996 minus 1963 is.
33.
Okay. The Nutty
Fucking
Professor
Rain
in
Man over
1996 was directed by Tom Shadyac, whose name you may remember from Ace Ventura: Pet Detective, which is a pretty similar film to The Nutty Professor for all intents and purposes. And he also directed Bruce Almighty and Evan Almighty, if we're just talking about movies that he directed. He also directed Liar Liar, so big Jim Carrey guy. Now, The Nutty Professor 1996, what is that film about, Richard?
It's essentially the same plot. You've got the Julius Kelp is now renamed Sherman Clump, and except instead of being uncool, he's incredibly fat. And so the Buddy Love potion he makes it's like a weight loss potion he's trying to make. And it instead creates this Jekyll and Hyde kind of situation, much like the original Nutty Professor, where he transforms into Buddy Love, who's an athletic Eddie Murphy, that has a way with the ladies. But then obviously things get out of control, and Buddy Love is too much for everyone. And he's also along for the ride is the Clump family, who's all, as you said before, is all played by Eddie Murphy in various fat suits and accoutrements.
Wouldn't it be interesting if it was Eddie Murphy's Nutty Professor drinks the potion and turns into Jim Carrey?
Yeah. Like a whitewashing kind of thing.
Imagine the whitewashing conversation that would happen then. What percentage do you think the Nutty Professor 96 has on Rotten Tomatoes?
Actually, I guess this one would be just scraping over 60.
Yeah, 64%.
Yeah.
However, it did win the Oscar for Best Makeup at the 69th Academy Awards.
Yeah, it probably deserved it. I mean, it's pretty good.
It's good.
Like,
yeah.
it's pretty good fat makeup, and like, you know, Gary Oldman won this year, so
That's how you do it.
yeah.
Then 4 years later, in the year 2000, they dropped the and had Nutty Professor 2, The Clumps, directed by Peter Segal, and co-written by Chris Weitz, who, if you're struggling to recognise that name, he also co-wrote Rogue One. But then also co-directed American Pie, as well as About a Boy, and solo directed New Moon. I want to get this guy to interview for the podcast because what an interesting career trajectory. Anyway, what's Nutty Professor 2, The Clumps about?
So essentially, Sherman wants to get rid of Buddy, and so he makes another serum, and it splits him into two. So like Buddy's his own separate person in this film, and he acts as the antagonist. But however, the longer eventually it comes up that the longer Buddy's out of his system, kind of thing, he's just going to keep losing brain cells, and it's like his degeneration. And then also like the clumps are a bigger part of it because everyone loved him in the first one, I'm guessing.
In the first one, Buddy is defeated when Sherman stops taking the potion or drinks another potion. I can't remember. That essentially like stops him from being able to transform. But in the Nutty Professor 2, it's revealed that Buddy still exists as like a strand of his DNA. So occasionally he'll blurt out these like sexist and inappropriate things in public, and so he tries to take that DNA out. But unfortunately, a dog knocks it over, and it turns into a fully fledged Buddy Love. And then 8 years later, we returned back to the classic original continuity in a film once again titled The Nutty Professor, or The Nutty Professor 2 Facing the Fear, depending on which Best Buy you picked up the DVD from.
Oh, appealing to our international listeners, are you?
Yep. That film was directed by Logan McPherson and Paul Taylor, and apparently, I don't know if this is an updated statistic, but the 45 years between the original film and the sequel is the longest gap in motion picture history for a sequel in which the original star reprises his same role, because Jerry Lewis is in The Nutty Professor 2008 as Julius Kelp once more, though he is not the main character. However, he was 80 at the time and sounds exactly the same as he did when he was in his 30s, which, I mean, you couldn't say the same about like Carrie Fisher or Mark Hamill. Their voices changed like extremely over their careers, but yeah, he sounds exactly the same.
It's because he's doing a voice for both of them, so maybe it's easier to just do that same voice rather than I'm sure if you spoke to him it'd sound different. But,
so what was the story for Nut Prof 2K08?
Nut Pro. So this one is animated, as we said, and it features Drake Bell as a young... what's his name? What's Drake Bell's name in the movie?
Harold
Kelp, who's Julius's grandson, and he gets his hands on his granddad's formula and creates the alter ego Jack, who's real cool and everyone likes. And then there's also like this demon monster that's inside him, which is like his fear. And then and he's like friends with an alien, and the demon monster ends up coming out, and he has to like face his fear. And
what has an audience score? It doesn't have a critic score. What do you think that audience score is?
Very, very low.
It's 31%, which means nothing considering it's an audience score, and I didn't tell you the audience scores for any of the other films.
What was the Nutty Professor 2's score?
26.
Right, yeah, that makes sense.
So in order of critic score, it goes in descending order. This is such useless information, but the audience score for the animated film is the second highest above The Clumps. but who cares? Who gives a shit? Okay, so interesting question. As a whole, would you say you liked this series? And if the answer is yes or no, it doesn't really matter. Which was either your favourite or your least not favourite?
Yeah, I did enjoy parts of them. Like, I actually quite enjoyed because I'd seen the Eddie Murphy ones when I was younger, and which is probably the right time to enjoy them when you still find fart jokes real funny. And I did enjoy watching the first one. It's a bit more like mature in the sense that he actually like gives this big speech at the end and explains why you should just be yourself, kind of thing. And there's a charm to like a movie from the '60s, you know. And then the first Eddie Murphy one I kind of enjoyed, whereas the second one I have like real strong memories of watching it. And so there was a kind of nostalgia factor for me on that one, but it is significantly worse. And then the animated one is like so bad, but at the same time, it's also like not trying to be good at all.
Yeah, it's a kid's movie.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is weird that you'd make a kid's movie out of a property that no kid would have seen.
Yeah, that's the thing, because not only are you making it a sequel to like an adult film, but you're also like it's a 45-year-old adult film. Like what children have seen this?
I agree with you somewhat. It's weird because the 60s version is way more popular with critics. But in my opinion, the first Eddie Murphy film, it like executes the central idea much better because Buddy Love is genuinely despicable in the Eddie Murphy version and is an actual threat to Sherman's well-being. And he's actually quite a good bad guy. Like, he's annoying, he's rude. Eddie Murphy really like encapsulates this evil character. Whereas in the original film, the 1963 one, Julius and Buddy just kind of occupy the same space together. Like, they're not really enemies as much as they are just sharing a body. So I'd say the original is a more admirable movie because it's from the 60s, but the remake does it better, but still isn't a better movie. And maybe that's because the fart jokes kind of drag it down a bit. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I guess it's to do with like the message of the films as well. Like the first one actually seems to have like a clear message of like be yourself. Like you can be this cool macho bravado guy, but then, and it's like this is within him the whole time, but it goes a bit too far, and he should have just been himself because that's what the girl he was interested in actually wanted. Whereas like in the Eddie Murphy one's kind of just like fat people are all secretly assholes. Like, if you make them thin, they're going to turn into these egotistical pricks.
Right. Well, not necessarily, because I guess so. Yeah, I guess Buddy Love is influenced by the amount of social power he used to not have, maybe. So, yeah, that's interesting. But I don't know. I think as well, the idea, like, when Julius in the original 1963 version takes the potion, he essentially gets a comb out and takes his glasses off. When Eddie Murphy drinks it, when Sherman Klump drinks the potion, he changes form. Like, he loses all this weight magically. And that, at least, is a more interesting visual way to show the change because, yeah, as opposed to just the same actor dressing different. It's actually
then, to be fair, I did actually really like how different Julius and Buddy are in the original. I thought that was actually quite a testament to the actor that they are so different. They're like almost, unrecognizable from each other. And it's just like you said, it's just a different while he's taking off a wig, taking off his glasses, and acting and being confident. And it's actually quite a remarkable change.
They both serve different purposes. However, Jerry Lewis would agree with you, Richard, because while he was an executive producer on the remake and a sequel, he's dead now, so he did agree. Yeah. Wow. Can you agree with something before someone says it?
He would have agreed with you, is what
He
you'd
would
say.
have agreed with you. Because he was an executive producer on the remake and its sequel, but was reportedly not a massive fan of Murphy's interpretation because of all the fart jokes. He's quoted as saying, "I have such respect for Eddie, but I should have not done it."
Yeah, well, because that's why he didn't do a cameo or anything, eh?
Yeah. He said, he also went on to say, "What I did was perfect for the first time around, and all you're going to do is diminish that perfection by letting someone else do it." So yeah, he pulled out of appearing in the film as a cameo.
Well, it's interesting because imagine like someone had to have a conversation with Jerry Lewis, considered one of the greatest comedic minds of all time. Someone had to be like, "No, Jerry, the fart jokes are staying. I'm right.
Yeah.
You're wrong. They're funny." And he was like, "Well, I'm not going to do a cameo. I take my name off. I want to take my name off this." And he was like, "Well, you're fucking wrong." Like the fact that someone had to stand up to Jerry Lewis and defend the massive amount of fart jokes, like they're not exactly essential to the plot, other than people think that fat people must fart a lot, and that's real funny.
Yeah, it's the Eddie Murphy brand more than it is the Nutty Professor brand, and depending on what you're into is depending on whether or not you'll like it. I thought the fart jokes weren't very good, personally. On coming up with the idea to do a remake, Eddie Murphy stated, "I'd gotten to where I wanted to do some other character stuff again. I was watching one of those daytime chat shows and there was a cartoon of a person losing weight and you kept seeing this big body breaking away till it was a little skinny body in the middle. And I put that idea with Jerry Lewis's old idea and I went and I pitched it to a couple of people. Nobody was interested in it. It floated around a little bit. Then I pitched it to Brian Grazer and he liked it, got in touch with Jerry Lewis and he liked the idea of it." Which brings me to this, we sort of touched on this already. The Murphy's Nutty Professor series has this weirdly, like, for all its faults and all its, like, oh, it ruined the original and it's, it's certainly targeted to a certain demographic, people who like fart jokes. It does have a weirdly, like, ahead of its time message about body positivity. Like, whereas the original film is about, like, being yourself. The remake is more about, like, you're not unattractive if you're fat. Like, you can still be a good person and be...
I mean, it's still like... I don't think you walk away from that film as a fat person and think, yeah, I feel good about myself.
Well, as a fat person, I felt kind of good about myself watching. Well, not really. It did make me think what my buddy love would be like. And because I'm like... I've only just recently, like... moved on to the fat spectrum in my life. Like, I'm not as bad as Sherman Klump. I feel like the Buddy Love version of me would be equally as skinny as I am fat, and therefore we'd both look exactly the same because we're kind of meeting in the middle of...
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to, like, Revenge of the Nerds, how in Revenge of the Nerds, it's like everyone day to day is like, you're a nerd and that's disgusting. And, like, people just come up to Sherman and they're like, oh, by the way, you're fat and that's gross, get away from me.
Yeah. So, Nutty Professor 2, The Clumps, was, of course, critically maligned. But, and it'll be interesting to get your thoughts on this, Richard, the general consensus from what I can see is actually, like, yeah, it's a really bad movie, but Eddie Murphy himself is amazing in it. Like, that's, like, Roger Ebert. It was like, yeah, Eddie Murphy is incredible in The Nutty Professor 2. And that's, I guess, because he's playing all the characters, all who are, they're all pretty different characters and all have different personality traits and that sort of thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think, you're right. He is pretty good in it. And for me, I remember there's a scene at the end when he's pretty much lost all his brain cells and there's, like, hope of getting Buddy Love back into his body has all but diminished. And he's sitting there with Janet Jackson, who's his love interest in the film, and he can't remember her, but he's just like, pretty lady, because it's like this real, like, heartbreaking moment. And I remember that, and I remember watching that when I was younger. I'm pretty sure I remember, like, my sister crying at it, and it was pretty, I thought it was so moving. And watching it now, I'm like, this is real dumb, but there's like there are some, like, good moments of, like, emotional gravitas as well as his character work.
Yeah, exactly, totally. It's funny you bring up your personal memories of the second one, because I have a few about the two Eddie Murphy films as well. I remember seeing a commercial for the first film when I was like 7 years old, and all it showed was a clip from the movie where Sherman is having a dream sequence where he gets so fat that he's literally like kaiju-sized giant who walks around the city and like farts people away in like tornadoes. And when I first saw that, I thought The Nutty Professor was a movie about a man who grew too big. And so it was kind of that Kangaroo Jack syndrome, where I thought Kangaroo Jack was about a talking kangaroo from the trailers, but that was also a dream sequence in the film. And so I was really excited for it. And then I think we taped it and I watched it, and it's this dumb story about Eddie Murphy and like becoming skinny instead of fat. And I was like, oh, all right. But nonetheless, I was really excited for the sequel when it came out. But the sequel, you wouldn't notice this as much as an adult, but it's a lot more, the themes are a lot more mature in the sequel than
like
the original
sexy,
remake.
you mean?
Yeah. And so, like, I remember getting the DVD out, or probably videotape out, of the second one when it came out, and my mum turning it off after like 15 minutes. Like, the second one opens with, I posted this screenshot on Instagram, if you follow us on Instagram. The second one opens with Sherman again in a dream sequence where he imagines himself getting married, and then Buddy Love like is trying to break out of Sherman's body, and there's the shot of him like his like head bursting out of Sherman's crotch, and it's like, how did I even get this far before my mum turned this movie off?
Yeah, it's literally the opening scene.
Yeah. But man, talking about that, I do want to focus on all four of these movies. And you may have seen some of them, you may have seen none of them. All four of these movies are so weird, and they're so weird in such different ways. Like, they all have something about them that is like, what the hell am I actually watching? So the original presents it like this infuriatingly annoying character. Like, if you don't know who Professor Frink is from The Simpsons, Julius Kelp essentially talks like this for the whole movie, and he's like, it's such an annoying thing to watch an hour and a half of.
Yeah, and so speaking of, just a quick put a pin in that I noticed in the Nutty Professor 2 that Julius adopts Glaven as his catchphrase. That's not in the original, is it? That's just from The Simpsons.
I don't think so. Maybe it is. I didn't watch it closely enough.
Yeah, well, because I didn't notice it in the original, but that's a Professor Frink catchphrase. And so it's Glaven. Like the student has become the master. And Jerry Lewis played Frink's dad.
Oh, cool.
And a Halloween special.
For me, the weirdest thing about the first movie is it ends with him as Buddy Love going up on stage at like the school dance, because he's a university professor. And I don't know why university. I don't know why university would have a dance, but there you go. And he slowly transforms back into Julius while he's doing like a performance as Buddy, and he does like this speech about how he's sorry for tricking everyone and not being honest, but it goes for like 5 minutes. I
really liked it though, to be fair.
Did you? I zoned out. I was like, oh my gosh, this
I zoned out.
Going.
I liked it though.
He just keeps talking, and it's like, this is going on for way too long. So I thought that was pretty weird. But yeah, the animated sequel, Pro Nut 2K08, so his character returns to the film, but ultimately the film, I don't know if you agree with this, it feels like a bunch of cutscenes that were mashed together from like a cancelled Xbox game.
It does. It feels very Xbox game. Like, it's funny that you picked up on that as well, because like, you and I are both PlayStation people. Mm-hmm. But to me,
it's
felt
not
like
a PlayStation game.
It felt like an Xbox cutscene. Yeah. I don't know how. I don't know why. But yeah, that's so funny.
I think the Xbox were maybe more when Xbox started out, they commissioned a lot more like original cartoony properties to try and like
the cartooniness
cast a net to get their like mascot. Like, no one ever played Grabbed by the Ghoulies on Xbox.
Or Scalar.
Yeah. But yeah, I think it does feel like an Xbox game, and there's even a penultimate scene which feels like a level from a game where the characters inexplicably race on motorbikes. It's set at like a academy, essentially another university.
Yeah, it's very futuristic though. Like I said, like he's got an alien friend and stuff like that.
Yeah. And so there's a scene where they inexplicably race on motorbikes, and that's followed by a boss battle with a giant monster. You know, like there is so much mixed ingredients gone into this film that make it, and for some reason the result is it feels like a video game, and I'm sure the animated quality adds to that as well. So yeah, that's a weird one. And as we said before, why was it even made? Maybe it's that DVD thing we talked about with David Mickey Evans, that they had the rights to the Nutty Professor IP, and we're like, let's do it.
The fact that Jerry Lewis is in it is interesting. Yeah,
10 years before he died. Sounds exactly the same. He died at 90. He's 80 in the sequel. And as I said, he sounds both exactly the same as Julius Kelp and Buddy Love. And also in that movie, whenever in both the original and the remake, when Sherman transforms and he comes up with the name for Buddy Love, it's because someone calls him Buddy. They're like, "Hey, Buddy," and he's like, "Yeah, my name's Buddy. Everybody knows Buddy." And he comes up with Love because he's trying to impress a girl. But in the animated sequel, the love interest is like, "What's your name?" And someone says Jack, and he's like,
"No, he sees it on a like marquee, like a ticker kind of thing."
Yeah. It says Jack, and he's like, "Jack," and she's like, "What's your last name?" And he goes, "I don't have one, or it doesn't matter." And it's like, what? You just come up with a last name?
No. The joke, you're not doing justice to that, but
okay.
There's a whole bit with a pizza, and while Jack's there, and then he offers the girl Polly a piece of pizza, and she's like, "No, it's fine. I've had enough cheese for one day." And then he's like, "Yeah, me too. I've had enough cheese today as well." And then because they've just had these two cheesy guys try and hit on her, and then she's like, "So what's your name?" And he looks up at this ticker thing, and it says Jack, and he's like, "Jack," and she's like, "What's your last name?" And then he looks up again, it says Cheese, and he's like, "There's no last name."
Okay, no, that's probably better. To me, it was more like, it's so easy to come up with like a last name equivalent to Love.
Well, because it would have been Jack Cheese, but he was like, sure. Okay. No.
All right, fair enough. So moving on to why all these movies are weird, or moving back to why all these movies are weird in such different ways. The Eddie Murphy remake, I am baffled that this movie is not up there with the likes of B-Movie or Shrek, for its like mineable content for like memes.
Memery.
like the insane and like garish special effects in this movie are so funny. Like Eddie Murphy, like watching a skitty Eddie Murphy transform into a fat one. Like there's a scene where he's like sees he's transforming back into fat Sherman, so he like runs out of this club he's in, and then someone chases him, and they open the car door after he gets in his car, and he turns his head like whip cracks around, and his lip is real big, and it's such like terrible CGI, but it's so funny looking. And then the movie ends similar to the original film, where he's on stage in front of a bunch of people fighting with like, and Sherman and Buddy are fighting in the same body, and his arm grows real big, and then his like body grows real big, but then he like pushes it back into, and it's such a funny, unintentionally funny, but also is supposed to be funny looking thing. And it's like, how is this not like me when I'm me after I eat gluten or something like that, you know? there so obviously need to be memes made out of the first film, but the sequel to the remake is the strangest one of all, and that's why I saved it till last. They go out of their way in this film to show that like it's not just like, oh, Eddie Murphy plays multiple characters. They create shots and scenes to make it so that you see two Eddie Murphys interacting on screen with each other. Like there's one egregious example, but just to give you a more nuanced, like subtle example, there's a part where Sherman meets Buddy for the first time outside of his body, and the camera like turns around them, and so skinny Eddie Murphy walks behind Sherman, who's fat Eddie Murphy. They like touch, and it's seamless. It looks fine. It looks like they're two different actors, and so it's actually quite well done for a technology that was still like burgeoning at the time in the 2000s, in the early 2000s, of having characters and playing the two characters interact with each other. But there's also a scene where Eddie Murphy makes out with another Eddie Murphy. It's Grandma Clump making out with Buddy Love, and maybe that's a metaphor for the series, that it's Eddie Murphy making out with himself. But again, it looks great. Like,
that one was pretty bad, I thought.
Do you reckon? Oh, maybe I didn't have my glasses on when I was watching or something. But like, They kiss, and it's right in front. It's like a close-up of him as the grandma, like sticking his tongue down the throat of Buddy Love, which technically aren't they related? Like the movie kind of pretends that that's not a thing. But yeah, I don't know. I was impressed by how much they jumped into the challenge of having these characters not only interact but touch each other.
Out.
Yeah. And also probably what this movie deserves the most modern day conversation about regarding it is it depicts a hamster which, through a bunch of wacky scientific miscommunications and trickery, it transforms into a giant hamster and then ends up raping the university dean. And it's depicted as a joke. The dean like sees this giant hamster and he's got like a fur coat on and he's crawling away, and the hamster's like, oh, it's another hamster, and then it like mounts him, and then
because we see the hamster having sex a bunch throughout the film.
Oh, true. And then the university dean, it cuts to him and he just goes, ho! And you know, that wouldn't fly in a movie today, but it is pretty true to late 90s, early 2000s comedy, but it's also true to comedies which are sequels to movies that Tom Shadyac directed, because Ace Ventura 2 has the villain it ends with the villain getting raped by a gorilla. Anyway, while these things are treated as jokes, it's this Dean getting raped by a hamster is being broadcast on live TV, and it cuts back to the Clumps watching it, and Grandma Clump, like, you could easily like push this out of your mind as like a bad taste joke, but then Grandma Clump talks about how like getting raped by a hamster would change the Dean's life forever, and like she's like, that'll change a man, that'll be the worst thing that ever happened to him, and it's like, don't make me think about it. Don't treat it as a joke. And then, of course, by the end of the movie, the film hints that the Dean might actually be romantically interested in the hamster.
Because like that's kind of pre-2000, pre 9/11. Like if rape was funny enough, like rape would be funny if the person ends up falling in love with their rapist.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, but speaking of rapists,
and also if the male is a victim. It's funny.
That's true. Speaking of rapists, though, did you notice
a certain name? I did notice that, actually.
Tell me about it.
I almost didn't watch the film. It's funny to think that, like, the Nutty Professor 2, or the Nutty Professor Facing the Fear, is
the animated sequel.
The animated one is produced by the Weinstein Company. Now, it's weird that since this whole thing has come out, I think this is the only film that I've watched that's produced by him.
It's the only film I've watched that opens with Harvey Weinstein Presents.
This has come
out.
Yeah, like it's this is the first time I've like supported him in any way, and it was, to be fair, I did illegally download the film, so it's not too bad.
I think the best case for dank memery for the Nutty Professor series, specifically in the Nutty Professor 2, The Clumps, is when the film culminates. Like, the climax of this film is fat Eddie Murphy chasing skinny Eddie Murphy as he slowly deforms from a man to a newborn baby to a puddle of goop. Like, it looks insane. How how does no one remember this movie? How has no one
Memeing
created meme after meme of this movie? It's just insane.
Keep an eye out for Cult Popture on Twitter and Instagram, where you are going to see some serious memery.
Plenty of memes. Okay, so before we move on to continue the franchise, one thing we often talk about on this podcast is actually titles. So once again, the titles for these films are The Nutty Professor, Nutty Professor 2, The Clumps, and The Nutty Professor. And while I don't necessarily have a problem with nutty as a word, though it isn't a word you'd hear used anymore to describe crazy, I think The Clumps is kind of a lazy subtitle for Nutty Professor 2, because
it's not what it's about.
Yeah, Schumann's family certainly feature more prominently in it, but it's not really an angle that serves the story, and it's more just an excuse for Eddie Murphy to further explore the characters. It's very thinly veiled as being Eddie Murphy being like, I just want to impress everyone with how many different characters I could play. And to be fair, he did impress everyone with it, but it's still, it'd be like, I don't know, what's another example where a sequel could have been called the thing
Clumps.
everyone went to see it for?
Fuck.
It'd be like, I'm looking at my DVD shelf. It'd be like if Children of Men was called Unbroken One Take. That's the best example I can think of from looking at the DVDs on my shelf. So it's
Swordfish was called Halle Berry's Boobies.
Yeah. Or if Die Another Day was called James Bond and Halle Berry's boobies are also in the movie. Anyway, did you have any further thoughts on the titles? It'd be like if
Monsters Ball was called.
If Catwoman was called.
If I don't have any thoughts? Yeah, I mean, it's kind of annoying for this podcast to have three of them called the Nutty Professor.
Yeah, true. Totally.
But yeah, there's I guess there's the original, the remake, and the animated one. So
yeah, true. It's quite a we get every kind of sequel you can get with this franchise, similar to how Dumb and Dumber had an original, a prequel, and a distant sequel. This film has original, a remake, a sequel, and an animated spin-off kind of thing. All right. Continue the franchise. Continue the franchise. That was a theme song we did once say we were going to implement in when
El Jaguar.
El Jaguar gave us it back, and when we did Lady and the Tramp. But where's the Lady and the Tramp live action film? That's what I want to know.
No, honestly, it just got there was just some announcement about it today.
Was there?
Yeah, hold up.
If it's not Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone, they do not know what they're doing. Because Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone are the Lady and the Tramp.
Disney's live action Lady and the Tramp now has a director 7 hours ago as of
Who's the director?
Recording. It is the director of the Lego Ninjago movie.
Funny.
That's so funny that
yeah, I don't know if we've talked about this on the podcast before, but the often what we find, and it's just confirmation bias, I'm not claiming it's anything else, but whenever we do a franchise, there's more often than not, probably actually more often than not, there is news on that franchise, not soon after we cover it.
Yeah, it's actually insane. Even we did Back to the Future, which is out of developments. You can't. And then this letter that Steven Spielberg wrote, defending the title, came out 2 weeks later.
I don't know if that was new though. I think it just resurfaced.
Yeah, but I mean, it's it's still
It's
it was on the front page of Reddit a week later. Yeah, there's so much stuff that happens so often. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. I know it's just confirmation bias, but anyway. So in regards to continuing the franchise, as usual, I'm going to go through a few ways in which this franchise has already been continued or talked about being continued. So probably the most significant is that there is a musical theatre adaptation of the original film. Cool. I think Jerry Lewis directed it. I don't think it's still playing anywhere. And the fictional cocktail that the original Buddy Love gets the bartender to make him in the nightclub in that original film, which is called the Alaskan Polar Bear Heater, which he makes up clearly on the spot, and it's full of like a bunch of things that would kill you if you drank it. That is now listed on some cocktail websites, so I don't think it's the actual recipe.
Damn, there goes my continue the franchise.
The Alaskan Polar Bear Heater. Regarding a third Eddie Murphy film, there hasn't been any updates since 2010 when Murphy, while doing a press junket for Shrek Forever After, said, "You know what? There might be another Nutty Professor. We kind of wrote something that might be kind of funny. If the studio wants to do it, we'll do it. If you don't see it, the studio was like, this isn't funny." So we can assume the studio was like, this wasn't funny. But I wonder what it could have been. I wonder how unfunny it could have been. Maybe it's just Eddie Murphy's lost his touch. With recent movies. But as it stands, I would say the closest thing we have to a new sequel in the Eddie Murphy series would be the 2007 dumpster fire Norbit, where he plays multiple characters, including a dweeby nerd and his large, overweight, abusive wife. I mean, you go on Norbit's Wikipedia page and you Control F Nutty and nothing comes up, but that's just a observation that I made about the Nutty Professor. What's your continue the franchise?
So I sort of have a couple of ideas, I guess. One thing that I've sort of brought up on the podcast and we've talked about, especially lately, is I love the idea of like changing sort of opinions of different things. So you've got like Revenge of the Nerds talked about doing a reboot about like how now it's cool to be a nerd and the jocks from these 80s films would be just idiots. And so I kind of have a similar idea of like a jock wanting to take a nerd pill or like a nerd serum.
Mm-hmm.
So like flip it like that. I mean, like it's weird. How would you get the serum? Because of he can't, like a big part of it is that he invents it because he's a genius. But then there's also like the idea that, so I'm just talking about a reboot, obviously, by the way.
Yeah.
The idea that in the 2000s, like fat people were like the looked down on ones, and it's like that's what makes you undesirable. And now that there's like health at every size and all these body positive movements, it's like what like part like subset of society is it still okay to portray as undesirable to be?
Short men.
Yeah, he's a short man.
As a short man, I feel very victimized by society. And I would definitely take a serum to make me 5 inches taller. Like, I don't even need it to be that noticeable. Okay, cool. What are some more ideas that you've got?
That was all of them, I think.
That was one idea.
Well,
I guess that was 2. No, you're right.
Yeah, I was like talking about like a reboot, but there's a couple of different ways that you could take it. In terms of like, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to see another sequel with just Drake Bell and no Jerry Lewis.
No.
And I don't want to see any more Eddie Murphy ones.
No. Well, I've got bad news for you then, Richard, because my idea for Continue the Franchise is called The Nutty Professor Meets Dr. Dolittle, in which both of Eddie Murphy's iconic 90s characters, which are based off movies that were made before he was born, create some kind of experiment together regarding talking to animals, because that's what Dr. Dolittle can do. And then I wrote this, at the end of the film, Jerry Lewis's original Nutty Professor and Rex Harrison's original Dr. Dolittle show up, but both men are dead. So maybe they're digitally recreated. Who cares? Stupid idea. That's what I wrote. Then I wrote, maybe they all meet Donkey or Norbit or Pluto Nash or every other Eddie Murphy character, since he likes to be every character in his movies.
Yeah, no, that's cool. And they meet Donkey, and he can talk to Donkey, but then it's like...
Yeah, exactly.
He's like, oh my gosh, I can talk to Donkey. And he's like, Donkey's like, I'm a talking donkey.
Yeah. And everyone's Eddie Murphy. I want to see the Eddie Murphy cinematic universe where Eddie Murphy plays literally every person you see on screen. And they're all previously established characters as well. So you got like Beverly Hill Cop and...
1,000 Words Man.
Yeah, the guy from 1,000 Words, or
Dave,
the guy from Coming to America, and Dave. These are
Coming to America is another plays heaps of characters.
True. None of these characters would really feel that out of place meeting each other, though. Like the reality rubber band of all of Eddie Murphy's movies could definitely be stretched to him. Like Nutty Professor and Doctor Dolittle could definitely work.
Yeah.
Like those characters could definitely meet. They exist in the same kind of surreal reality. Anyway, that was my
And
idea.
also, are we there yet? No, Daddy Daycare.
Yeah, I was going to say that's Ice Cube, Richard. That's not Eddie Murphy. However, if Eddie Murphy from Daddy Daycare showed up, would it be him being played by Eddie Murphy or Cuba Gooding Jr. who played him in Daddy Day Camp?
Yeah.
Maybe Cuba Gooding Jr. is the only other actor who isn't Eddie Murphy in The Nutty Professor meets Dr. Dolittle. So that's all my ideas, and that's all I really had to say about The Nutty Professor.
Do you know about Dean Martin?
What about him?
About well, do you know first of all, do you know who Dean Martin is?
Not in any way that I could say who he is.
So he was a member of the Rat Pack, like Frank Sinatra's sort of posse with Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr. Dean Martin was one of the big ones, but he sings "Ain't That a Kick in the Head." That's like his.
Ain't that a kick in the head? Yeah.
Yeah. So he, Buddy Love looks and sounds exactly like Dean Martin, and in
the 1963
in the 1963 one, and Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin were Lewis and Martin. They were a comedy duo for several years. They did heaps of movies together, heaps of live performances together, but they had a massive falling out in I think 54. And they didn't speak to each other privately or publicly for like 20 years. They did a couple of things where Lewis would have to cancel a gig, so Dean Martin would fill in for him, and it's there's maybe a little bit of respect still there, but they hated each other. They could not stand each other. Apparently Dean Martin got sick of being the straight man, and they parted ways until 20 years later in the 70s when they used to have all these telephones, and Frank Sinatra was I think Jerry Lewis was hosting, and Frank Sinatra was like, "Oh, I've just brought my friend here," and he brings out Dean Martin, and the two of them hug and sing together and stuff like that. But The Nutty Professor comes out right in the middle of this massive feud, and it's essentially Jerry Lewis doing a Dean Martin impression and saying, "This person is everyone likes him, but he's a bad guy."
Wow.
And so it's actually really interesting subtext to it that sort of, I guess most people wouldn't, especially nowadays, wouldn't pick up on, but might have been people, I think, because Lewis and Martin made their names together kind of thing. And so at the time, people have been like, holy shit. But I think Jerry Lewis denied that it was supposed to be based on Dean Martin.
Well, maybe that's why in the Eddie Murphy version, Buddy Love is more of an antagonist, is because maybe Jerry Lewis was holding back on how disrespectful he wanted to be to his old friend. That's cool.
Yeah.
All right.
I learned about all these things. I was watching the show History of Comedy. It's a real good show. Anyone check it out. And they also talked about another person called Moms Mabley, who was a early female comedian. She was an older black woman. And Grandma Clump is very clearly a Moms Mabley impression.
I read that. But didn't know who that was, so I was like, I'm not going to write that down. That's cool, man. Yeah. So overall, would you tell our listeners go watch Nutty Professor?
Because I imagine a lot of people have seen or have anecdotal knowledge of the Eddie Murphy ones. I'd say check out the original. It's quite interesting, and it's cool to not only see because Jerry Lewis is considered one of the great comedic minds. And Nutty Professor's one of his sort of classic films, so it's cool to check that out. One thing that we haven't mentioned, I don't know if it's we normally mention this kind of stuff, but you know about The Day the Clown Cried?
Yeah.
We didn't talk. Should we say anything about it? Because it's just kind of interesting.
You take it. I don't know enough.
Well, so yeah, as I said, Jerry Lewis considered one of the great sort of comedy minds of our time. Well, of past generations. But he made this film called The Day the Clown Cried, which is it's a Holocaust film about a clown getting sent to a concentration camp, and it's I think it's a drama, but it's not a very tasteful one, and it's never been released. The Library of Congress has a copy of it for cultural significance, but they're not allowed to release it until I think 2024. And so then it will be made available. But I think 10 minutes of it was made, surfaced online maybe 2 years ago. And Harry Shearer, who voices a few characters on The Simpsons, he's seen it apparently and says it's pretty fucking bad. Yeah, so by all accounts, like I think a few people have seen it, and I think maybe like Howard Stern's seen it, and they all say like, yeah, this is real bad. I can see why you buried it, but it's like this lost film that might surface one day.
Wow, that's pretty cool. Well, before we read out our fan mail, let's do a little thing called franchise roulette.
Ooh, okay.
Are you ready?
Am I ready?
I'll bring up the list.
More like, are you ready? All right, random number.
106.
106.
Okay, so 106 is the Legally Blonde trilogy. So there's Legally Blonde 2, Red, White, and Blonde, and Legally Blonde. So that'll be the next franchise. We were actually talking about Legally Blondes, the Legally Blonde trilogy recently.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we'll move on to fan mail now, but just quickly, if you like this podcast and if you liked us, then please consider supporting the show, not financially, I'd never ask that of you, but just by liking our Facebook page, subscribing to our YouTube channel. We do videos and stuff as well. We're also on Instagram and Twitter, and you can email us at cultpopturemedia@gmail.com. Okay, welcome to our fan mail section. Richard, you sound better.
Yeah, a little bit.
It's amazing how just having a sore throat made it sound like you recorded that entire podcast on a laptop instead of a microphone.
Yeah, it's one of those. It's like like an optical illusion, but for your ears.
An oral illusion.
No.
No, I refuse to be corrected.
You know what I'm like with being corrected.
We're going to read out some fan mail now. So if you send us in fan mail, get pumped, get excited. And if you didn't send us in fan mail, you can still be excited. That's okay. Anyway.
Yeah, feel free.
So it's been a while since we actually did this, so we're going as far back as the Ancient American Pie episode. So here is the comments from our YouTube American Pie episode. Isaac Mount said, I just wanted to say that as someone who watched the American Pie films along with the podcast,
thank you for doing that.
Yeah, I hope more people do that.
What a cool boy.
Yeah, he says, about the father scene, I agree with you, AJ, you're not alone. Oh, look at that. Is he still a cool boy?
Nah, he's a dumb boy.
For those
this isn't me like objecting to being corrected. Like he's just wrong.
Yeah, me and him are both wrong. If you don't remember what he's talking about, and listener discretion advised just for this brief segment where we discuss something a bit lewd, there is, of course, a famous scene that Richard and I argued over in the American Pie movie, the first one, where Kevin is going down on Vicky, and as her father is going up the stairs to her bedroom to tell her that dinner's ready.
As Kevin's going down, her father's going up the stairs.
Vicky, of course, cries, I'm coming, and to which her father hears this, doesn't open the door, and walks back downstairs. Richard's interpretation of the scene...
When Vicky says, I'm coming, what does she mean?
She's jizzing.
She's reached the point of climax.
Yes. But of course,
let's look at the maturity difference between me and AJ there.
Richard interprets that scene as her father hears I'm coming and thinks, okay, she's coming down for dinner, no need to open the door. Whereas I interpreted that scene originally when I first saw it, and so did Isaac, that maybe Vicky's dad's just a real cool dad. And maybe he hears that and goes, oh, you know what? Sounds like my daughter, who's like, obviously she's a teenager, she's a sexual being, she's enjoying a sexual act. I will not interrupt it and make it awkward for her. And Isaac agrees.
Yeah, well, like I feel like I need to rewatch the film and find a clue somewhere that Vicky's dad is like wouldn't be cool with that.
I'd just say that's bad character consistency. But anyway,
There's always a fucking...
I don't even think that was just how I interpreted the scene the first time I saw it. I don't even think that is. Anyway, Brent Taylor, a regular commenter, also touched on a soft spot between Richard and I, so we're really like dragging the shit out in this fan mail section. Brent says, haha, since I've been specifically asked to comment on the Lost episode, which of course refers to an episode where I watched Home Alone sneakily instead of Die Hard, and Richard got real mad at me, and we never released the episode. He says, Alex, I don't know why he thinks he can call me Alex. That's a bit, we're friends, Brent, that's fine. He says, Alex, I don't think what you did was that bad, but I also don't think it was funny enough to actually go through with, which is a really great summation of, like, everything that I think is funny. Like, everything I do for comedy, it's not that good, and it probably wasn't worth doing in the first place. Yeah. Like this podcast. Daniel also commented on the American Pie episode and said, I don't remember subscribing. Thank you, Daniel. I hope it turned out good.
You've since remembered when you subscribed and why.
On Facebook, Craig Major commented, I was the exact target demographic for the first film when it came out. This is for American Pie still. He says, I hooked up 2 VCRs and made a copy of the one I rented from Video Easy. So I really enjoyed this episode, fellas. Especially liked AJ's rendition of the early noughties singing voice. Which of course refers to this singing voice. Richard can do it better than me, but are you feeling up to it, Richard?
Nah, my throat's still a little bit sore. I'll get bloody phlegm all over the microphone.
Oh, come on.
But hopefully there's some early 2000s pop punk in Legally Blonde, which will no doubt...
There should be.
Trigger
Stiffel's
me. Yeah, there's bound to be.
Stiffel's
mum, isn't it?
Yeah. On Instagram, someone named YoungHeady0312 commented on the American Pie post and said, like, the thumbs up emoji, then an emoji that my computer doesn't recognize, so it's just like a square, and then an orange. I don't know what that means, but I thought it was funny enough to read out.
Like, what is the possible midpoint between those two emojis?
What connects what thumbs up plus what plus orange equals American Pie?
Yeah, like it's like and one of those 4 picks 1 word apps or something like that.
Yeah.
Find the missing emoji.
On Twitter, we got tweeted by another podcast called Premiere Quest, which is actually another New Zealand podcast, and they actually featured some clips from our show on their season 4 premiere episode, so check that out if you want. The concept of their podcast, from what I understand, is that they're trying to score tickets to Pacific Rim, what's it called? 2?
Uprising.
They're trying to score premiere tickets to that.
Which came out yesterday, so I hope they succeeded, I guess.
Yeah. Anyway, they tweeted us about American Pie and said, this ep was top notch. I said, thanks, friend. Maybe if we keep tweeting each other, Jason Biggs and Eugene Levy will weigh in, because we tweeted Jason Biggs and Eugene Levy in those tweets. And Premier Quest said, that's the plan. Also, what's up with hashtag Adam Hers? You want to get in amongst the convo? Adam Hers was, of course, the screenwriter for American Pie. And after they tweeted us that, I discovered that Adam Hers doesn't actually have like an official Twitter, so I tweeted every Adam Hers I could find at the same time and said, which one of you crazy fellas wrote the first 3 American Pie movies? And Premier Quiz said, it'd also be fantastic if one of you, looking at you, Eugene, could shed some light on the whole hashtag I'm coming, hashtag justice for Vicky situation. And then I said, hashtag are the spin-offs canon, which I think refers to a joke that I cut out of the actual American Pie episode. But it's still a valid question. Are the spin-offs canon?
Hashtag are the spin-offs canon.
I don't know if I should say this. I actually tweeted Tara, is it Strong or Reed? I can never remember.
Tara Reid. Tara Strong's the voice actress.
Yeah. I tweeted Tara Reid and asked her what her dad meant, but I was like, this is a creepy tweet to be sending. Like,
hey, when you pretended to have an orgasm in this film 15 years ago,
yeah,
what happened?
She did not respond. However, both Lindsay Ellis, video essay Lindsay Ellis, and Last Jedi director Rian Johnson did like one of our tweets recently, so that makes up for Tara Reid not responding to me asking if... Anyway, we also got an email not long after that from a guy named Eric who lives in Colorado. I actually met Eric over this past weekend at a wedding, and he's a real great guy. So hi Eric, thank you for being a fan of the show, and
thank you for being a friend.
Yeah, he made me feel really special because he was one of the groomsmen, and I went up to say hi to him, and he like insisted I sit down.
And he was like, "Sit down! The bride's about to come walking down the aisle."
No, it was after the ceremony had finished, so he like made me sit down and like, well, didn't make me, but he invited me to sit down, I should say, and we just shot the shit and talked about the podcast heaps, and he's a big fan. Anyway, he sent us an email. I'm not going to read out the whole chain because it was quite long, but he did initially write, "Kia ora, Cold Popture, and good afternoon. I thought you could do with a bit of mail, and what's better than the mail from the United Republic of Donald Trump? I stumbled on your podcast, and when you live streamed your most disappointing films of 2017, and I have to say, God, that was long. Still, the banter, rants, and AJ's schoolboy spin cap made it worth endless seconds waiting for AJ to type out spoilers for Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Men Tell No Tales. Really, though, the episode hooked me, and I began listening to your other episodes, and have loved having you on my radio. The Colorado snow is cold, but the Kiwi company keeps me warm. No homo. Sincerely, the American." What a nice little email. He also commented on Facebook on our episode Biggest Oscar Snubs of All Time, which if you only listen to the show on YouTube, check out our SoundCloud, because every second week we upload a non-film franchise Fortnights episode, including our Oscar season, which just wrapped up. And so on the biggest Oscar snubs of all time, Eric wrote, "I 100% agree. All I know and all I care about, because 2049 didn't go for Best Picture or Best Original Score, for which I haven't loved a score like this one in ages, is for the love of God, give Roger Deakins an Oscar." Well, he got one. He got it for cinematography.
Yay.
For Blade Runner 2049. While listening to our episode, he said, "I felt like a churchgoer in my car listening to that, but being all, yes, amen, preach." Also for snubs, don't forget... Yas Queen. Also for snubs, don't forget that when Titanic went up for all those Oscars, they didn't nominate Leo, and it said that because of the snub, he decided not to attend that year.
Ever seem like a fun person.
I think he thought he'd at least get nominated. Edamon also commented on Biggest Oscar Snubs and said, "This will be a good one. A pleasant evening walk listening to you suckers. Love it." I like that. I like the idea that people listen to us while
we like an Ingham chicken for him.
Yeah. On our Revenge of the Nerds film franchise Fortnite, Ingham chicken. No, I didn't know what you meant. I was like, I didn't get it. Move swiftly along. What did you mean?
Well, you know the ads like Ingham chicken. Love them.
All right. On our Revenge of the Nerds episode, film franchise Fortnights, Matt Hall commented, "I think the incel community is so damaging to the ideas of healthy relationships. Real great discussion. Hope it shows the dangers of thinking of the opposite sex as a binary in/out system."
I think you need to think about the dangers of just thinking about the opposite sex at all.
Yeah, it's dangerous thinking. He also says, "By the way, our incel, or whatever it was, low-key back as our nice guys." And then he said, "Hope the move goes well."
Yeah, I think
it did go well.
Our nice guys is like more of a taking the piss out of them, but I think the actual community is back on brain cells, BRAINCELS.
Go there and tell them Cold Pop just sent you, and send them our Revenge of the Nerds episode where we explain that being a nice guy, #nice guy, is incredibly toxic and very dangerous.
And also we didn't discuss it in the episode because I don't know why. I felt like we should have explained it, but I didn't realize AJ didn't actually know what incel meant. But
I knew what it was. I didn't know what it meant.
Yeah, if you're wondering, it's short for involuntary celibate. So it's men who think that through no fault of their own are forced into a life of celibacy, whether that's because they're fat or they're ugly or they've got bad genes or whatever. Occasionally you'll get a post from a girl that's like, girls can be incels too, and then all the guys are like, fuck you can just have sex with whoever you want, you're probably going to go have sex with a Chad. Chads are like the villains of the incel community.
Yeah. On Facebook, Eric once again commented and he said, to answer your question in the podcast, American high schools are like that completely, but to be honest, in college no one cares at all, which actually affirms what we were saying. Because
talking about the clickiness of it all.
Yeah. In Revenge of the Nerds, it's set at a university, but everyone still acts like high school. And Eric goes on to say, honestly, it was the most refreshing thing about going into college. You mean no one cares what I wear or what groups I join? Legend. You had another question, but I can't remember. It's been ages. Thanks, Eric. And Brent also commented, this one doesn't make sense with that context, but he said, what if we're making dinner in the car with our mum and kids? Do they cancel each other out? I think that was because on the Facebook post I said listen to it while you're in the car or making dinner or something like that. I don't know. Probably
you
shouldn't
said
have
don't do
out
that.
one.
Don't listen to it while you're like making dinner with the kids or in the car with mum because it's a bit dirty. That's the rape one. That's the one where we talk about rape a lot.
Yeah, that's true. Oh, that's right, yeah. On Romancing the Stone, Tim Tabor on YouTube says, the Nutty Professor remake kind of falls into that generic childhood film you talk about here for me. Never seen the original. I agree. It's the Nutty Professor, despite being probably a more mature and adult-oriented film, it is, I can't quite put my finger on it, but it's that late 90s, early 2000s comedy, the likes of 101 Dalmatians, the live action
or like
version.
102 Dalmatians kind of thing.
Yeah, or no, that was it, wasn't it?
Those are the only two.
On the podcast we also did on SoundCloud, video game movies and why they all suck. Nick commented saying, VR is interesting because it's becoming the muddling of video games with movies in a way that wasn't previously possible. This VR game, The Invisible Hours, is probably a good template on how to make a video game by approaching it in terms of immersive theatre. And then he posts the trailer down below his comment, which you can look up by typing in The Invisible Hours trailer. He says if you could take major game franchises and approach them in the same way, it could work. That's a really good point. But I just feel like the more you subvert what making a video game into a movie is, like, the less impressive it is.
Yeah, you're not like following the rules.
Yeah. It's more impressive to make a good straight Tomb Raider movie than anything else, And by the way, a little update to our video game episode. Tomb Raider has now taken the mantle of the highest rated video game movie of all time at a whopping 50%. So good, not great. Still the exclusive reception for video game movies. Craig also commented on this episode on Facebook and said, desperate for listener feedback, eh? Cracks knuckles with an asterisks. Did you guys think of covering any? Should I read this like a guy is annoyed with our lack of research? Did you guys think of covering any survival horror games turned films? In particular, Resident Evil or the Silent Hill series. He says the first Silent Hill film deviated from the games considerably, but was written by a respectable at the time writer Roger Avery and directed by some French guy who was incredibly faithful to the tone and aesthetic of the games. The sequel wasn't great, but followed the plot of Silent Hill 3, one of the better games, pretty closely. I don't think either were received all that well, but most horror picks of that era weren't either. I wonder what percentage of critics rated them as video game movies versus horror flicks. Resident Evil films were a lot more average. They deviated a lot more from the source, but with both series I'm also curious about whether the game developers, all based in Japan and creating a vision of American settings filtered through a pop culture lens, were removed enough to create a more nuanced narrative and tone than a Hollywood film studio could. That's such a good comment. I have actually quite positive memories of the Silent Hill movie, and I wish I'd said something on the episode. I'm sure if I went back to watch it now, it wouldn't be that great, but yeah.
Yeah, it's we didn't disregard them. We just we stuck to the top rated ones, and it just didn't happen to be those.
Yeah, true. On Instagram, on the video game movies episode post, someone named Vampire said DM me, and then the red 100 emoji. I think that's because the image I uploaded to advertise the podcast was Alicia Vikander as Lara Croft in Tomb Raider. So I think that Vampire thinks we are Alicia Vikander.
Well, yeah, maybe, or maybe Vampire is Alicia Vikander, and she's like, "Oh, do you guys want to do a podcast with me?"
Oh,
great. I think we should DM them.
Yeah.
I know you were too scared to, but
All right, I will.
okay.
What should I say?
Hey, what up?
Okay, I'm going to.
Cool. We'll follow this up next time.
Okay. No, I can't do it online. Probably one of the most interesting exchanges we've had. This is our final fan mail comment. Irene Phages. I don't know how to say your name. Sorry, Irene. But she was actually our Secret Santa recipient, whom we sent like a art book.
Yeah, I sent her like a blank book because I found while her Twitter was very bare and there wasn't a lot to take, I managed to find her on Instagram and I found out she's an artist and a very talented one at that. And so I bought her a little sketchbook.
But she commented this comment, and I'm glad I replied and cleared up what she meant, because otherwise I probably just wouldn't have read this out. Because she said about the video game movie podcast, 99% agree with you. The Lord of the Rings was cool though. I'll listen to more of your podcasts. So here I am, like this fan that we've received in such a cool and interesting, like, organic way. Comments and her comment like infers that Lord of the Rings is a video game. So I replied and said, awesome, we hope you enjoy our other episodes. Lord of the Rings is based off a book though, not a video game. And she says, that's what happens when you wake up too early after St. Patrick's Day. I was thinking of a good game made after a movie. Those are pretty rare.
Oh, maybe that's another podcast we could do in the future.
Yeah, I'm glad she clarified, because otherwise I would have felt really bad for reading it.
Yeah. But you know what the best video game based on a movie is?
Tell me.
Spider-Man 2 on PS2.
Sam Page NZ replied to Irene and said, those were damn awesome games. I wish they'd released them on GOG. I don't know what GOG is. Comment below what GOG is.
Goggers. Walton Goggers.
Anyway, that's it for this episode. Thank you very much for listening.
And thank you for having us in your ears.
We'll see you next time.
You'll hear us next time.
See ya.
Laters. Oh my gosh.